what are some red flags that indicate a consultant might have conflicts of interest?
Well, I think, unfortunately, you have to go in with the assumption that the consultant is more likely than not going to have a conflict of interest, only because that's how the industry worked and has always worked. Now, I will say in recent years, in the last 5 years in particular, maybe 10 years, there's been a proliferation of independent consulting firms over time. Certainly a lot more now than when Third Stage first started. So there are more independent consultants out there. So now the other risk that you have to consider is not only is the consulting firm you're working with, are they truly unbiased in terms of economic incentive? So in other words, if they are getting any sort of financial kickback from the software vendor, that means they're going to be biased and they're not acting in your best interest. We've had a couple clients, probably two over the years. I'm surprised it's only two. So I'll share this little secret that I've learned from clients that have asked us to do this. But there's been a couple clients that have asked us to incorporate into their contracts pretty stiff penalties and cancellation clauses if there's any, or if it's determined that we are somehow affiliated with a software vendor financially. And we're happy to do it because we're not. So we know we're not going to run into trouble with that. But if a consultant refuses to put their money where their mouth is, or to put that in writing in a contract, that should be a red flag. So that's one layer is, are they truly economically unbiased? But the second thing that's actually harder to pick up on, but it's just as concerning, is when an ERP consultant doesn't know, they've got blind spots, especially some of these 1 and 2 and 5 man or woman shops. They're really small consulting firms that maybe they are truly independent in terms of they don't have an affiliation with software vendors, but they're not big enough and they don't have the tool sets and the experience to really know all the different systems out there. And so they go with sort of what they know best. If it's someone that grew up in the Microsoft space, for example, that's all they really know. Even if they're not getting paid by Microsoft, they might just lead with a Microsoft first mentality because that's what they know best. And it's just path of least resistance for them. So the way around that is, a lot of times clients will ask us, tell us the last 20 or 50 or however many software selections you've done. And can you share with us the short list of which short list you recommended, and then ultimately which product you recommended and implemented for that client? And when you look at our list, it's completely random. I mean, it's just a bizarre, it looks like, throwing darts almost, but obviously there's a logic to why we recommended what we did to different clients, but every client has different needs, and you'll certainly see some repeats. I mean, you'll see, for example, SAP's on there a couple times, or Oracle, Microsoft, only because they are such big, well-known systems, but they're certainly not dominating the list of recommendations we make. So that's another thing you could do, is ask the consulting firm to recommend the last, or to give you a list of the last 20 or 50 or however many projects they did in a software selection, and tell us what the short list was and what the recommendation was. So that's another way to look around it. You just want to make sure that there's not like an unintentional bias that's not just financial, but more of a lack of knowledge.
Yeah, that's some really great advice for companies that are looking for an independent consulting firm specifically. To get a little bit more advice out of you, how can companies evaluate whether a consulting firm's tools align with their project's unique needs?
Well, I think any tool set you can start with is a good starting point. So I think you have to assume that this is a good starting point, but I'm probably gonna have to tailor this to fit my needs. And so I don't know. That's a question of, is it a good fit? It's how can I make this? How can I take this great starting point that has maybe worked in the past for these consultants? How can I take that and tweak it to fit who I am as a company? And also, poke holes in it or challenge it. I mean, I was just in a meeting last week for a client in the Eastern United States. It's a big manufacturing company. And they were asking us that. I mean, they were asking, we were going through our proposal with them because they're just starting out. We're just getting started with this company. And they were questioning the timeline and saying, hey, we move really slow as a company. Do you think this timeline is realistic, or do we need to add time to it? And so you sort of dig into it, and you start asking more questions around it, and we refined it, stretched out the timeline, not only because they asked or because they said it might need to take longer, but as we dug deeper into why they thought that, we agreed with them, like, yeah, this probably will take longer. So you just want to have a conversation like that. And you have to work. I think you need a consulting firm that has a good starting point, but is flexible enough to where they know where to pivot and they know where to modify just because this worked for the last client doesn't mean this exact same cookie cutter thing is going to work for you. You can use 80% of it or whatever, but you're probably going to have to modify some things to make it fit you. And I think that's the assumption you've got to go in with.
Yeah, absolutely.